Would you risk an entire kingdom's treasury for a handful of dried flower buds? In the age of discovery, monarchs sent massive armada fleets into the unknown, gambling everything on a single spice. Today, we explore how the quest for cloves sparked brutal wars and forever redrew the map of our world. The value of the clove in medieval Europe defies modern logic. To the citizens of the 14th and 15th centuries, this pungent, nail-shaped spice was not merely an ingredient. It was a currency, a medicine, and a status symbol that outweighed its own weight in pure gold. In a world defined by the scarcity of flavor and the desperate need for food preservation, the clove was a miracle. It arrived in Europe through complex, shadowy trade routes, traveling across the Silk Roads and through the hands of countless middlemen, each adding their own layer of markup. By the time a single ounce reached the markets of London, Paris, or Venice, its cost was staggering. Kings and queens sat in their gilded halls, consuming dishes heavily seasoned with this rare treasure, never fully understanding the source of their luxury. The Spice Islands, or the Moluccas, remained a cartographic phantom. They were whispered about in taverns and royal courts alike, a cluster of volcanic outcrops tucked away in the far eastern reaches of the archipelago that is now Indonesia. No Western map dared to pin them down with certainty, and this mystery acted as a siren song. Monarchs felt the sting of their dependence on middlemen, and they began to dream of bypassing the world's gatekeepers. The motivation was not merely culinary, it was existential. Sovereigns realized that whoever controlled the source of this spice would essentially hold the purse strings of the civilized world. Thus, the desperate voyages began, not with the goal of scientific discovery, but with the ruthless objective of extraction. Every expedition was a high-stakes gamble, a roll of the dice where the prize was total economic supremacy. The race across the unknown was a theater of unimaginable suffering and unparalleled technical achievement. Driven by the scent of potential wealth, sailors pushed their wooden hulls into horizons that had never been charted by their countrymen. The journey around the Cape of Good Hope was a gauntlet of storms, disease, and starvation. When ships finally reached the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean and began their arduous crawl toward the Pacific, they were operating on faith and dead reckoning. Navigators peered at the stars through primitive sextants, praying that their calculations for longitude were correct, while their crews succumbed to scurvy and despair in the dark corners of the hold. Yet, this violent pursuit of flavor forced the hands of progress. The demand for cloves acted as a massive catalyst for innovation. Shipbuilders developed faster, more durable vessels capable of enduring months of open water traversal. Cartographers began to fill in the blank spaces of the globe, forced to document coastlines and wind patterns that had been previously ignored. It was during this frantic search for the Moluccas that the world's map was permanently altered. Explorers stumbled upon new continents, vast archipelagos, and diverse civilizations, often treating these discoveries as mere obstacles on the path to the clove trees. The desperation to find the source of the spice accelerated the era of global exploration, forcing the disparate pieces of the planet to collide in a violent, messy, and irreversible embrace. This was a period of extreme hubris. The belief that the world was simply a resource to be harvested by the strongest arm led to the systematic erasure of local customs and the reshaping of indigenous landscapes to suit the singular demands of the European palate. As the trade routes stabilized, the era of the first mega-corporations dawned, forever changing the nature of international power. The Dutch East India Company emerged not just as a business, but as a sovereign entity with its own army, its own currency, and its own laws. Their mission was singular and terrifyingly efficient: to monopolize the clove trade at any cost. They arrived in the Molucca Islands with an agenda that viewed human life as an expendable overhead. The tactics used to secure their dominance were brutal, involving the systematic subjugation of local populations, the destruction of unauthorized spice trees, and the exclusion of all other European powers through blockade and siege. This was the birth of corporate warfare. The wealth generated by these tiny buds began to transform the financial architecture of Europe. Ships returning to Amsterdam laden with spices fueled a sudden, massive explosion of capital. This wealth provided the foundations for modern global banking systems, the emergence of liquid stock markets, and the creation of credit instruments that we still use today. The Clove was the original engine of globalization. It taught corporations how to scale their violence and their efficiency, proving that a single commodity, if managed with enough ruthlessness, could build empires and bankrupt rivals across the sea. The men who sat in the boardrooms of the Dutch East India Company were the architects of the modern world's economic systems, trading in lives and spice with an detachment that remains chilling to study today. They operated without the oversight of any central government, acting as a state within a state, where the quarterly profit margin was the only morality they recognized or obeyed. The geopolitical landscape of the 17th century was a direct reflection of these colonial rivalries, with borders shifting like sand in a storm. The Portuguese, Spanish, and Dutch clashed over tiny volcanic outcrops that few people in Europe could even locate on a map. They saw these islands not as land, but as vaults containing the world's most precious resource. The intensity of this conflict is perhaps best illustrated by the Treaty of Breda in 1667. In a move that still baffles historians, the Dutch agreed to trade their territory of New Amsterdam, modern-day Manhattan, to the English in exchange for the island of Run, a minuscule, clove-rich speck of land in the Moluccas. At the time, this felt like a logical, lucrative business deal. The Dutch wanted to secure their iron grip on the clove supply, and Manhattan was considered an underdeveloped, rocky frontier. The long-term consequences of that single trade reshaped the entire trajectory of North American history. These colonial rivalries turned the map into a game of strategy, where islands in Asia were traded, conquered, and abandoned to satisfy the hunger for spice. Borders were not drawn based on culture, geography, or the will of the people living in those regions. They were drawn based on the cultivation zones of a flowering tree. This legacy of conflict remains a defining feature of the modern world, as colonial demarcations continue to influence international relations and regional stability across both Asia and the Americas. It was a time when the stroke of a pen in a European diplomat's office could mean the displacement of thousands and the death of an entire culture, all to ensure that one nation could maintain its exclusive hold on a spice that added fragrance to a rich man's meat. The human cost of this obsession was often buried beneath the success of the traders. Behind every bag of cloves delivered to the docks of Europe lay a trail of broken spirits and decimated islands. The local populations of the Moluccas, who had lived in harmony with the clove trees for generations, were forced into indentured labor or displaced into the dense jungles as their ancestral groves were burned or strictly regulated by the foreign powers. There was a profound arrogance in the European approach. They brought with them the diseases of the old world and the greed of the new, viewing the lush, biodiversity-rich islands as nothing more than an open-air warehouse. The ecosystem itself suffered. The monoculture-focused plantations demanded by the Dutch destroyed the natural balance of the islands, leading to long-term environmental degradation that persists to this day. And yet, this was the crucible in which the modern world was forged. The interactions between these diverse groups, however exploitative, created a new form of human connectivity. Languages blended, technologies were shared under duress, and the foundation of global trade networks was laid. It was a history defined by a paradox. The spice that brought the world together was also the catalyst for some of the darkest chapters in human interaction. We see the ripples of this era in our legal systems, our concepts of property, and our understanding of corporate responsibility. Looking back from the vantage point of 2026, the globalized world we inhabit is a direct product of this early pursuit of luxury commodities. The movement of the clove tree from its original islands to plantations across Africa and South America, a process known as the dispersal of flora, happened because colonial powers feared a monopoly held by their rivals. They sought to spread the crop, to dilute the power of the original producers, and to ensure that no single entity could ever again control the spice market so completely. Today, the clove is grown in places far from its volcanic origins, integrated into the local economies of Zanzibar, Madagascar, and Brazil. Yet, as we sprinkle this common kitchen spice onto our meals, we are participating in a ritual that is centuries old. It is a silent monument to a history of blood, navigation, and exploration. The fragrant aroma that rises from our kitchens is the final, softened echo of a world where small, pungent buds were worth more than human life. The map of our planet, its borders, its financial institutions, and its very distribution of power, was drafted by the men who steered those armadas into the unknown, driven by the belief that the world was there to be possessed. We live in a world that was effectively measured, divided, and conquered in the name of a clove. And while the wars have long since ended, the geography they created is the only one we know. The clove remains a global obsession, not because it is essential to our survival, but because its history is etched into the very soil of the modern era, reminding us that every convenience we enjoy today was once purchased with the heavy price of discovery and the relentless, unyielding ambition of empire. We are the inheritors of this complex and often violent legacy, living in a global society that still dances to the rhythms set by the spice merchants of 500 years ago. The story of the clove is not just about a plant or a trade. It is the story of humanity's first real attempt to conquer the entire world for the sake of a single, fleeting pleasure. And in doing so, creating a framework of greed and exploration that still dictates the fate of nations. As we look at the maps today, we should see not just lines and names, but the ghosts of those who sailed into the darkness for a bud of dried flower, and the enduring reality that we are still living in the world they built. This is the truth behind the spice. It was never just about flavor. It was about the power to decide who owns the world and who is merely living upon it. Even now, the echoes of those violent, fragrant voyages linger in our daily lives, a reminder that the price of global connection was written in the blood of those who came before us.